Hello, everyone, and welcome to This Week in Hospitality Marketing, the live show. I am your host, Lauren Gray. Thank you so much for your patience with our wonderful technical delays that we had this morning for our live time. We were a little off on our time start today, and I apologize for all those that were reminding me that where are you? Where's the stream? Where's the channel? Anyways, for those of you who may or may not know, we simulcast our show on a variety of Facebook pages with a variety of our friends and professional associations and groups and companies and so forth as part of their continued effort to put out good content. And then those are on Facebook pages. We have YouTube channels. We have the same thing, different collaborators and so forth. Also on LinkedIn under my profile of Lauren Gray, under X. We also are on Twitch, but more importantly, we're on the Hospitality TV channel. That can be found on all smart TVs, whether you have a Google TV, Apple TV, Amazon TV, Samsung, LG, Roku, they're all there. But we do the live show on there on the free side. There's a paid gateway for additional content and so forth. We also simulcast it if you're not familiar with our hospitalitymarketing.club. It's a peer level group for hospitality marketers, and we livecast on that as well for our members that are there. If you're interested in joining a peer level group of hospitality marketers where we get to collaborate, share questions and feedback and resources and so forth, just simply go to hospitalitymarketing.club, put your email in, we send you a quiz, and if you pass the quiz, then you are an active marketer, and we will go over and send you a link to join our closed club. It's not on Facebook or anything. It's a separate social entity that exists in our world. So anyway, with all of that, today I wanted to talk, interestingly, about, it's not a new strategy, but it's maybe a new concept to how we handle businesses as an industry. And that is about road mapping. If you're not familiar with road mapping, well, we'll get to that. Actually, let me get to that. But let me give you the title of our topic of today: roadmaps, transparency, and data use. What I'm finding is we're entering a very interesting and unique world when it comes to our data that we're accumulating. A massive shift in what we have as data is we're living through it at this moment in time. We are living through this transition of data. To just bring you into cyclic speed, and for those that have heard me repeat and say this before, I apologize. But for those that may be unfamiliar with what I mean by referring to this seismic shift of data, we went from a old-based universal analytics cookie tracking program that existed since the inception of figuring it out back in the early 2000s to a now much more robust, all-inclusive data collection called Google Analytics 4, their fourth edition of how they track. And no, Google is not the only way to track and monitor your AWS, and you have others, and they're efficient in their ways. Very, very similar in the same concept of how Google Analytics is handling theirs. But it is the 800-pound gorilla in the room. It is the most dominant used platform tracking software. And as such, it's a first-party representation of data collection, which means it's in everything. You use it, they get access to what you're using it for, plain and simple. Well, as of July of last year, we went through the full shift of Universal Analytics no longer being supported to new Google Analytics 4. So all of this variety of data is now being collected to Google's benefit. If you're not using it, shame on you. Google's getting it. If you're not using it, then you're not really utilizing the value of what they're offering for the privilege of you being the product of their commodities. So all this data and this transition of getting all this data, there's a need for using the data. And this came inspired in real life for me in the world of what we do next. Last year was a lot about making sure that all of our clients and all of our ways of doing things were properly positioned and transitioned for GA4. We actually started 2 years ago. So it was no big bump in the road for us. Actually, it was a welcome relief of not having to worry about keeping two worlds alive in the sense of reporting and data collection and allowing UA to fall off and just focusing on GA4. It also, because of the history of us accumulating Google Analytics 4 data, means that we have now a long history. Now, for those of you who may not be familiar with Google Analytics data, GA4 data, they only keep 14 months. So if you don't have a means of storing data, and we've gone through that, we've had a couple of shows back, I think in shows 421, 422 and 423, we talked about BigQuery as a database, which is Google's offering, and it does cost money once you get enough data, but it's pennies on the dollar because it's almost like a loss for Google in the sense of they much rather you keep the data with them. They get to use the data themselves, so they make it affordable. That's not the real monetization model per se. It's they do it in other ways with advertisement, of course, right? So um, that was our first worry last year. This year is a mission statement of better ways to use the data. And we've hit a wall. I'd say not that we have a problem for, but we're trying to address the wall that most people have. And that is the familiarization of how they used to use data historically. And I mean by what data they actually looked at. Okay. What charts and graphs and spaghettis and bars and pies and all this other stuff as to what they were looking at versus what data is available for them to look at and the improvement of being able to use that data. So we have two issues. We have people understanding data in the new format of what GA4 is. And that is based on familiarities of how they used to look at Universal Analytics data. Let me make an example. Total number of people that come to my website, total number of people that went to my cart, my booking engine, total number of people of those that converted, booked. What channels contributed to that process? Where did they come from? Paid campaigns, social media. Where did they come from? CRM, emails, whatever. And percentages related to those channel contributions and the costs related to those channels. Those are fundamental number metrics that people are familiar with. That is kind of a transition of what UA has taught us to look at in our business world for hospitality and what we needed to hopefully make good marketing and revenue management decisions. That is a lot of very similar to looking to the world only in black and white and ignoring that there's color to it as well. You see what you see, but you only see it in the tones that you're familiar with, the black and the white. You have no idea what the concept of red, green, blue, or any combinations of those that are. You're missing a richness to your data. And so we first tried to educate people on the new world of the data. And we were met with kind of blank stares, little drooly lips, as it was an overwhelming concept that there was more ways to look at the data than they had historically done because there was more data to look at than they ever had. What they were looking at is all they really had perpetually available on a consistent basis. So we realized our mission statement this year was to redefine what the reports could tell you in a way that was progressively educating somebody without them getting out of their full comfort zone. The reality of the world is people that use our data, marketers, revenue managers, owners, general managers, operations people, so forth, as an encompassing all awareness of what's going on, have a whole mess of other stuff to do than look at our reports. As we've made comments before many times, where a lot of people, they get the big, colorful, everything's chock full of happiness data, where there's squiggly lines and pie charts and bar graphs and sheets of Excel of tables and so forth. And the first thing that usually goes on is, well, what do you look at regularly? We've had this discussion. We've talked about auditing your processes. And a lot of times there's only certain numbers and certain things that look at perpetually. They're just looking for certain things because over time, that's the thing that they use or the thing that they're most interested in. And if something's abnormal, they may take more time to look at more things. But for the most part, they kind of look at think of your star reports in the old tab 4. You looked and the first thing you did when you got it every week, popped it open and looked at your RevPAR. Are you going to be the hero or are you going to be the villain? And that kind of singular purpose of data exists in lots of things because, again, you have other things to do. So we knew it was a process of not interfering with the amount of time or education process that went on with the using of the data, but they had to become more familiar how valuable the data was to make better decisions. And so our mission this year was to go over and improve the reporting process. And we broke them down into fundamentally 3 categories of people. A huge bulk of them, a very large percentage of them, simply need to continue on with the familiar numbers that they know so that they're aware of some things, but they themselves aren't the influencers of change. They just need to be aware for the decision processes that they're involved with. So those numbers I mentioned to you, total traffic, or those people going to your cart, those people that converted from your cart, what channels contribute to and so forth, are numbers that are familiar for them, and they just need them in the same similar format that they're used to, and they need to understand what they mean. Very simple, doesn't wrinkle their world too much, makes it comfortable for them. Then there is a moderate portion, very small percentage in comparison to the first, that need a more granular perspective of data. They need to understand the combinations of the numbers that created those numbers, a little bit more detail as to how the ad campaigns in your paid contribution, your paid campaign performance, how the ad campaigns individually performed and what were they targeted in comparison to the others and why certain ones worked better than others and so forth. Those people need a more granular data perspective than the first group, which just needed to be aware of some of the numbers in general terms. And these people need a little bit more granularity. Those are the people that tend to look more into the tables and charts, tend to look more into the bar graphs and trends and lines and so forth. And then you have the third and very fractionally small, but a very important section of people that just need to be aware of what's going on, should it need their attention. These are the, I would refer to them as the C-level groups, the ownership groups. They need to be notified. If something's not doing what it was expected to do, they need to be notified, good or bad, so that they can look and see, does it warrant more of their attention? They need to be made aware. They don't need bars and graphs and charts and bars and so forth, although they tend to act like they do, but in most cases they get filed and put. So if they need to go look at it, they have it, but it's not something they perpetually consistently use. These people would really benefit from just a very streamlined, hey, your ad campaign is not performing at pace as per what was decided. It reached a threshold of variance that we created as a marker for you to be notified, good or bad, that this is not performing as expected. They can determine that that is acceptable, or they can ask an underling or somebody to take more time, or they themselves take more time into why this number is not doing what they expect to do and why they got the notification. And then they can go into a more granular perspective of the data. So we broke these people into three categories for this, and this turned into our mission statement for 2024. How do we take what we're doing in all this accumulation of data and format it in ways that are better usable so that these categories of people can get what they need to continue on with their day? Well, in that process, we realized that there was no real communication format that conveyed this to everyone. The real politics of what we do is we look at everything for the first filter is how does it affect us? And I'm not biasing us and saying that we're bad people or anything, but we go through the course of our day, and when things happen, we see, is this a good thing for us or a bad thing for us? Just as simple as that kind of concept. Am I responsible for it? Not responsible for it? Do I have an influence on it? Not influence on it? Am I going to be blamed for it? Am I going to be praised for it? Simple, dichotomous perspective of personal. So with that, we have this adoption issue of when we present a new dashboard, and we've done this to our chagrin, where it's like, here's all this super cool data, and there's 20, 30, 40, 50 pages of reportable data that here's your correlations of peak traffic days versus conversions, peak conversions versus traffic, metrics against channels divided by source mediums, and just big old eyes. Like, wow. Impressive as hell. Thank you so much for me having that. But what am I supposed to do with it? And then slowly over time, if they get to take the time, they begin to rationalize, wow, this is really pretty cool. I can figure this out from this data now where I never had this data before. But that doesn't usually happen. First is a shock of, and so there's immediate pushback. This is going to make me work more, or it's going to cause me more issues, or I'm going to have more problems from it, or my team's going to need more problems from it, whatever it is. And that first filter of how does it affect me taints how well they absorb what the capabilities of what they're being presented to. That happens with the relative surprise factor, especially if it wasn't their responsibility to do this, and now they're being told that they have to do this. Just ask a general manager of any hotel for another report, and you will get the scowl of death from them because they already feel like they're already overtasked with reporting to other people what they're doing to the detriment of actually doing the work. There's not a general manager or director of sales or director of marketing or director of revenue management that won't give you the evil eye, the stink eye, when you ask for another report because they feel overburdened by them anyway. So that's what we were getting. Oh my gosh, what is this? Holy, can I just get the numbers I need? Can I just get them the way I had them? I was barely familiar with those ones, all right, so forth and so on. So you get this built-in resistance to these things because of how you present. The old a little bit of honey can go a long way for the teaspoon of sugar kind of thing for the medicine. So we realized that there is fundamentally three ways to get people engaged. Bring them in from the beginning, making them feel like they are aware of it so that they can't deny the fact that as you do things, that it's something that they're familiar with. The second is passive engagement, which is we'll let you know as we're progressing. And the third is don't tell them until it's done. The third one, unfortunately, is usually what goes on. A lot of it politically is because if you're trying a venture of creating something new and you get that personal perspective of somebody else that this is going to create a problem for me, they try to submarine it, they try to resist it, they try to create contention to it, they turn it into your pet project versus their pet project. Politics get involved. And it ends up dying in the water, even though it was a great idea, because it was early released or it was hidden and then it was discovered, or resistance to this is, why do we need this? This seems like overblown. Whatever the excuse of the politics are, it happens. And so from that, you get great ideas that go into a shelf or just go off into the world to the island of misfit toys. So we found that the opposite end of that is full participation has its problems too. You get a lot of uneducated opinion and or going back to the personal impact factor, an issue with how it affects them. Like, I don't really want this whole project to run. The same about optics. It's like, this seems like a burden. It seems an overextension, whatever the excuse of it is. They're not endorsing it, not they're supplying it. And because you're at that nascent level where there's still issues to wrinkle out and you can't answer all the questions objectively with positive answers, it gets into this floundery of back and forth. And the old adage, how do a camel is a production of a committee that made a horse. That happens. And it also will flounder and the project will get shelved or put to the island of misfit toys. The third way, which is the path we've taken recently, is passive engagement. And that is where we are transparent. This is our roadmap. Now, going back to what I first said about the beginning of the show, roadmap is a relatively unfamiliar term for our industry. It's not impossible. It's not that it's not being used. Sometimes it's bastardized, but for the most part, it's not a consistent. We're familiar with SWOT analysis and things like this, which still are just valid for different reasons. A roadmap is not a project management platform. There's a distinction. Project management platforms are for accountability, milestones, metrics, functionalities, communications, progresses, Gantt charts of combinations of when facility A is fixed, then facility B can begin, combinations of projects as they're interrelated to each other, so forth and so on. It is a functional tool of progress in process of what's being done. A lot of people tend to use their project management tool, if they're even doing project management. By the way, we should advertise a show about project management because gosh knows so many people don't even have those kind of facilities. Their world of project management is based on communication, email strings galore, and sometimes email strings that go way off of the original subject, but because it's used for the laziness of who's originally on it and the dialogue shifts and moves, they just keep repeating using it for now a dozen other reasons other than the original one. It's fascinating how people just like, oh yeah, well, everyone's on here, I need to extend this to, so let me do that. Or, well, I want to say this to this person in front of all these people, so let me make this comment that's unrelated to the entire email. You all see that all the time. So anyway, I digress. We're talking about transparency. So a roadmap platform is one that really categorizes what you're doing, what you would like to do, what's in the process of being done. Fundamentally, the simplest of the three categories. There is other categories that go to a roadmap should you want to be a little bit more specific to other things. But the real value of roadmaps, first, is the transparency. This is what we're doing. This is what we're thinking of doing. This is what we're in the process of doing. So there's nobody that's saying, well, if I had known that, well, actually, we did share the link that this is where you go to find out what we're doing. And it was there the whole time. So no excuse one is being able to use, find excuse number two. The other is that it can also solicit engagement. One of the strongest pushbacks when you're introducing a new way of doing things is, was that person involved with the process that you're now telling them they're responsible for at any stage of the process other than implementation? If you didn't, the first pushback is, hey, if you had asked me, I would have told you this column doesn't go there. That's useless. This column needs to be over here. The number that I need isn't even in here. And now I got to go math it out manually because you took it away from the old report. And you're sitting there going, I didn't think anybody used that number. So we just took it. That lack of informed collaboration creates dissonance as to what you're asking them to do. By the same token, if you do engage people and allow them to engage with you, there's an ownership and a feeling of mutual pride that as they are allowed to participate in the development of something that they will ultimately be engaged with, there's a buy-in that comes from that. Because if somebody else comes in going, what the hell is that? Oh man, they're making you do that too. It's like, hey, I was a part of the build. I like this because it gives me this and solves that. That ability to do that through a passive engagement we found is really super helpful. A roadmap is a neat way of saying, here we are, world. This is what we're doing. Now I would say world being not for everybody. This is an internal way of keeping collaboration. You don't want your competitors to know your process of discovery. You might give them a missing piece to a puzzle that they're trying to figure out. This is a closed loop thing, but the idea of having a roadmap of what you're doing, showing the progress of at least the three things I mentioned, giving a forum in which people can comment on what you're doing, suggest what you're doing, suggestions for what you're doing. You can poll them as to, hey, out of project B12 here, which would you think would be the most important? Option 1, option 2, option 3. Force rank them. And you get feedback from people. Now, the benefit of it is that you don't have to make everything that people give you as opinion a function of it. Some people have an opinion is like, that's great. It's just, you're the only one who wants that. And it's not for what you're asking capable to be put in, and it would be a detriment to everybody else who doesn't use that. Whatever it is, you don't have to use all the suggestions, but at least you're soliciting the engagement with them. Obviously, you're going to get in the wild perspective of what you're developing sooner than having to put it in the wild. What do we mean by putting it in the wild? When you launch something, you're putting it into the wild. You're saying, okay, we've done everything about this to be able to make it run the way we thought it was going to run. Now we're going to put it into the public, and they're going to give us the feedback of what they think, how they use it, what they think should be changed to be able to be used better, so forth and so on. You get that feedback. Think of it as the App Store back in the day where, Apple released their apps for the new iPhone, and it was neat, but everyone's sitting going, still complaining about the fact it was a flat piece of glass against the side of your head. And then they open up the App Store in which people go, oh, wow, wait a minute, you make this a calculator? Wow, wait a minute, you make the camera, on and on and on. You now have all this expanded availability. The real surprising things about roadmaps is the suggestions that come from people. Surprise you going, oh my God, that's brilliant. We need to add that. That's a perfect use of what XYZ that we're doing or whatever it is. That in the wild engagement through what roadmap can provide you is profound. It also helps from the politicalness of departmental progresses. If you're the department that roadmaps what it's doing, and the other departments who have used it, the our project versus your project mentality in the meeting, or what we do is more important than what you do, or whatever it is, and you're openly sharing what you're doing, it creates an impenetrable defense in communications. Any other department that isn't doing what you're doing, okay, that contrives against you, and it's like, why don't you put that on the roadmap we have? We would love to have gotten that feedback. It disarms them. It makes it difficult for them to do the point counterpoint us versus them conversations that we have so much in the politics of business. Instead, it makes it where it's like, look, we're telling you what we're doing. We're showing you how we're doing this. You're attacking a program that has openly been sharing what it's been doing. You're the villain. You're the bad guy. You're not the one that's really in touch with what's going on right now, and so forth and so on. It's a wonderful political tool. Now, I say this is not familiar to our industry because, in all honesty, most of what we do is rooted in more of a tradition than anything else. We have a very long budget season. There's this whole process of, accumulation of data, aggregation of what we're budgeting and collaborating and creating for, and then the presentation and authorization of it and so forth. This is a ritual that we go through from August through September, actually August or October. We have our SWOT analysis. How do we look at the world optically? It's us versus them, what we have versus what they have versus us. Who are we competing against? It's very, that kind of contrast. And those are all viable ways of what we do. Not here to change the world today. But when it comes to how we progress, most places don't have a project management software, which is, again, fundamentally the process of getting things done, not the exploration of what's to get done. Fundamental difference between what a roadmap and a project management tool is. And almost nobody has an open display of their roadmap of what they're planning on doing. They don't want to hold over their cards like that. They want to show that to the other departments, because the other departments are like, oh, well we'll do this. It actually breeds a very healthy contrast to other departments. It helps other departments realize this is better for us to, okay, they're doing it and I like to know what they're doing. That's always been a problem for me, is I don't know what's coming out of that department. And when it does come out, it's a surprise, and it usually impacts us, and it creates us to go into a tailspin, whatever. Well, let's show up what we're doing. Maybe we can collaborate on, here's your roadmap, here's our roadmap. Which ones are crossovers? Wow, you guys are doing a project that we probably could be better suited helping you with early input on, than to find out that you went down the wrong path early, and now we got to reconstruct what you did wrong because it affected us. That open communication that it breeds, we're already beginning to see the benefits of that. We're beginning to see the fact that rather than, marketing department A proposes what they're going to do on something, and revenue management first hearing it in a meeting, which always, you ever notice that's weird? It's like, why don't you send your information ahead of the meeting so that the meeting is productively about the context of what you're bringing everyone together, rather than the reveal at the meeting and people have to shoot from the hip or react because, well, I didn't know that. Well, these things aren't in front of me. I'll have to go back and look. And it just stagnates the meeting. You can't actually, with all the manpower that's in the room, proceed what the meeting could have been beneficial for, if most of the meeting is about reveal and counterpoint, and then you have to all disseminate again to go realize the impact of what was revealed in the meeting, to have another meeting to come back and decide what that was, and that's when another reveal happens then. It's an insane system to do that. And if you look, and there's plenty of surveys that show this, most everybody in any organization, hospitality is not excluded this, bemoans having unnecessary meetings, having a meeting for meeting's sake, or worse yet, having a meeting that's unproductive because it was called for something that didn't require a meeting. Anyways, roadmaps help pre-communicate. They help convey what you're thinking, both in current tense, present tense, future tense. And I say current and present being different. Current is the completion of and or what has been accomplished. Present is what you're actually fundamentally working on. Future is what you're integrating into what will be the next thing. So, because there's nothing past tense, is you do have a list of what's been rolled out, but that's also in the roadmap. This was on our vision map, which is a term related to ideas and thoughts. Okay, they don't necessarily go into a roadmap right away. Vision maps get translated to roadmaps. Vision maps are, wouldn't it be great if spaceships could fly? What are we going to do about our hotel then? That's a vision map. It's not going to happen tomorrow. It's not necessary today. Not something that has to happen in the near future. But it's one of those forward thinking. And I make that as a poor example. But the idea of it is vision maps are really hypothetical circumstances. Roadmaps are practical perspectives as to what your future is going to be, and your current processes are being done for it. So roadmaps allow this transparency. And this transparency allows for broader open communication. Why am I at the beginning of the show talking about data use? Because as the example I gave you of translating our first insurance, that as of the transitions of our accumulation of data and the seismic shifts in our data accumulation capabilities, was to make sure that we got it accurately done, consistently done, measured correctly, and in the same formatting compared to all the sources of data that we're getting. And now our next step is how to best use that and getting that data in front of people the way they're traditionally able to understand it. Now our next mission is about how do we translate the new usages of data in a way that benefits people in a process that is understandable and unobtrusive as possible. So there is an adoption to the understanding of the new data. Let me say about new data to give you some sample example. I gave you the example of basic old traditional data of how many people went to our website, how many people went to our booking agent, how many people converted, that kind of stuff. That's basic numbers that we're familiar with. New data, you get to see not only all the aspects of who these people are, but what rooms were available to them, how many package officers were available to them, what was the exposure rate of that inventory compared to the actual conversion values, what were the selection processes of what they were considering versus what they actually booked, what's the latency between their booking and their actual of their viewership and their actual booking versus actual arrival, transitions of denials, cancellations, what's the true bleed value of that particular channel, that channel in combination to other, what is the attribution of that channel in relationship to another channel, how is it based on whether or not where they first entered versus where they last entered, the attribution model, last exited, as to all the contributing factors that are associated with it, frequency, time decay, all of those feature abilities, durabilities, their durations of usage, and so forth. All that is stuff that we never had before. and yet we have it now. So now we can see how people interact with the emails, what they trigger to go to other aspects. What is that engagement in relationship to the paid ad engagements that they're doing? Which ad campaign, which particular ad? What are the dynamics of that ad? Is there a preference to date, day, demographics, geography, behavior? All of this data is available. It's an overwhelming perspective because you can literally be Alice in the Wonderland and ask so many questions that you get yourself painted in a corner of indecision. But if you have a clarity of the data by asking things like confidences, correlations, trends, pace, delta variations, where you can see that you're just not looking at positive numbers and green arrows up about production of revenue, but you're seeing that the trend of performance for the channels that are giving you that revenue currently are on the descent. It's not that you're positively not making money, which is an easy number for people to see. It's like, oh, look, I'm making a good conversion on this. This is great. No, what you didn't see was the delta variation of that channel, and that your paid campaigns that produce those good numbers are slowly producing them less. And all of a sudden, one day you're going to wake up and that green arrow up is going to be a red arrow down. And you go, what? And now you're reacting to something rather than seeing that trend diminish and proactively reestablishing what else is going to continue that trend value. Other campaigns, other variations, other channels of contribution. Hey, our paid campaign contribution percentages are diminishing, but it seems to be that the meta search is really filling that gap. Are they perhaps going to paid campaigns and just meta search is hijacking it? In the sense it's an easy conversion because we're catching people at that low end of the funnel. These questions of things turn really incredibly valuable out of that process. From that, you get to derive better answers. But to do that, you need to be able to understand what this data is and where it's coming from. And in order to do that, we can't just drop it on you. We can't just go over and say, hey, by the way, this is, a new report, and then leave it to them to figure it out. You get the resistance, you get the, oh, damn, I would have been great if somebody told me this was happening. I wouldn't have done it this way. I need this number. Where did my number go? What does this number mean for me anyway? Blah, blah, blah. But if you got them actively engaged in what you're doing, you got the chance to go over and have them input, and you might find out there's new things you have to add to the report that you weren't even aware of. So that's the data component of this transparency of a roadmap, the ability to create functionality and progress openly in front of others so that they can contribute to it, comment on it. You can even solicit what they think would be interesting things for you to develop, make you a resource to them. Like, I would love it if we could get a report of, or I would love it if we get this information that would tell me X, Y, and Z of these people so that I could do this with it. Putting it in as a request and having it reviewed and go, we never really thought about it, but that we do have that data. We could do that for them. It turns into an open dialogue that then, wow, if they see that their idea gets turned into a roadmap project, talk about ownership and buy-in and support from other departments. It's a huge bonus and push up. So I think I've made it pretty clear of how I value roadmaps and the usages of them in relationships to transparency and this adoption of how best to begin to handle all of this data that is going on in our world. One little quick interesting news note, just a tidbit of some things in the world, how they change, but they seem very small, but in a process of the chaos theory, butterfly wings and so forth, which has an interesting story why it's called the butterfly concept, but not just because of the butterfly on one side of the world and causation of a storm on the other. So Google is, in their hyper accuracy of their maps, beginning to demonstrate on maps, not everywhere and not for all types of buildings or businesses, but actual entrance points of buildings. And it seems really small. Like, oh, okay, duh, yeah, sounds great. Until you realize it's not been there. We see, dimensional maps on Google Maps, which are helpful. Oh, this is a big building, or this is a little building, or, this is how it relates to other things around it. So it helps us visually with that. And we talked about Google Goggles in many ways, where they get this hyper accuracy of all the bajillions of images they have of so many things from so many people, that when you're staying on a corner for an Uber usage, let's say, and you're on the southwest corner, that their hyper accurate marks, with the isolation of your location of your phone, can get blurred in a city to, you could be, according to your location of your phone, you could be anywhere within a radius of a few hundred feet sometimes, yards. That knowing the visualization of the buildings around helps in the hyper accuracy that you're on the southwest corner. So Uber knows that in the intersection, not to be on that corner, but to come around to your corner kind of mentality. Well, this thing with Google and putting entranceways into buildings is pretty interesting, because I know, and I have some clients that they're in a location, but by the way the footprint of the building, this is branded hotels, this is independent hotels, um, it's not common sense. For instance, I have a hotel that's located in a city that the address is on a blank wall side of the building, not the entrance. So anybody takes the maps and goes, they pull down a road and they're seeing the hotel. It's right there. The logo's on it. But the road that they've been brought to go to it literally is not the entrance. It's the back of the hotel. But that is their address. The entrance is on the other side. And since all the one-way roads are around it, it makes it really quite a challenge, because a lot of times most of the front desk is occupied telling people that if they're driving or having taxis come in, if they're not familiar, or Uber drivers coming in, do not go down X Street, go down Y Street, because that's the actual entrance. On a map, how nice would it be? It shows the entrance on the map. And for the independent hotels where they have a big footprint, but the entrance is actually underneath the building down to the center of the building. Think of like the Marriott Marquis in Times Square. The entrance is not necessarily where the address is. You can get to it, you can walk to it, and so forth and so on. But I see so many people getting dumped off on the edge of the building and not actually pulled into the porte-cochere that's underneath the building. Taxi drivers know it, but Uber drivers may not. Anyways, the idea of it is that as simple of a little thing that this is, showing the interests into buildings, the incredible value potential that has in one less thing that is a wrinkle to a person coming to you or getting to you or understanding what it means to go to you, compared to it not having been there before. We're going to throw some things into the podcast today that other things about content generation, of you doing your own content generation. We all have the dreaded photo shoots. And if you're a brand, you have to follow certain guidelines for certain images, for certain things. And a lot of them are very generic. And then you have independent ones, which try to pattern themselves similar to what the brands do. But you're missing the value of doing your own photo shoots for that. They're very expensive for the qualities that you need. And they're not all useful for what you need them for in today's world of advertisement. Your video and imaging ads, your own social media posts and so forth. You run out of usage, of repetitive usage, where the same room shot gets used way too much by you for way too many things, and turns into white noise visually for people seeing it on social media or seeing on your paid ads. It's generic to anybody. It's generic to any, just it's a room. Yeah, nothing different. You probably take somebody else's room picture, save yourself some coin if you could. So we're going to talk about that on the podcast today, about how you can create your own stuff. We've gotten a lot of questions and feedback for that, so that's why it's on the podcast today, some tools and usages for this kind of thing. Slight divergence from our show content today, but we might actually bring it in as a show to talk more about grabbing a $400 360 camera and a little monopod with a baby tripod on it, and taking a couple of days and getting your own pictures, and what software platforms to put it up on that you can use it for. Not to just make 360 pictures, but to actually make a 360 image that people can move around and see all around the room and so forth, or see all around in your lobby and things like this. And you don't need to pay $30, $40, $50, $60, $70, $90,000 in a photo shoot for that types of pictures, but you need extra pictures for all the other stuff you do. So we'll talk about that on the podcast. So for everyone watching us and following us today, thank you so very much. Sorry again for the delay on getting us started today. For those of us who watch the simulcast at Wednesdays, 11:30 a.m. from Sydney, Australia time, for our APAC friends, thank you so much for doing that. And also for people watching us 11:30 a.m. Wednesday morning on the recast, London, UK time, for all of our EU and Mideast friends. We'll be catching up. We're going to be doing some international travel soon, so you're going to start seeing some interestingly different backgrounds as we travel again this year for a few months. So we'll keep you up, and that was kind of fun things too. And we'll have a little bit more of an international twist in some of our dialogue, and we'll have some extra guest hosts from that process as well. So with that, my name is Loren Gray. Thank you for the privilege of your time, and look forward to talking to you all next week.